This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you are in the future because you're listening to Cristina Gomez and Shifting the Paradigm.
Howdy, folks. This is Lou Elizondo, and you are listening to my very good friend Cristina Gomez on Shifting the Paradigm.
Hi, this is Ray Sobbs from the UnX Network, and you're listening to Shifting the Paradigm with the intrepid Cristina Gomez on the X.
You're listening to the UnX Network, KUNX-DB, Kansas City, Missouri.
Welcome to Shifting the Paradigm. I'm Cristina Gomez on the Paradigm Shifts channel and on the X, the new mainstream KUNX digital broadcasting talk radio. Are you ready for this? Because we're about to embark on an hour and a half of UFO shenanigans and paranormal adventures. Right here is where we look and think outside the proverbial box. We jump down those rabbit holes where you get a red Tic Tac instead of a red pill. First off, make sure you subscribe and share these shows on social media to those who you think are having their minds and eyes open to the reality of the UFO mystery. All of these shows are great primers. And in the push for more clarity, transparency, and disclosure, the more voices demanding answers, the better. For those listening on KUNX Talk Radio and affiliates, I have two other shows each week that only air on my YouTube channel. Thursdays is Mysteries with a History at 2:30 p.m. PST with my co-host, Jimmy Church of Fade to Black Radio. On Fridays at 3 p.m. PST is Weekly Strange News. This Friday will be with my guest co-host, John Russell. The Unknown Zone has now been pushed to every second Wednesday. So follow me on Twitter to keep up to date on my news and posts at eyes_on-the-skies. And definitely check out my website at strangeparadigms.com for all show archives, more information, and direct video links to my channel. Let's get into some news. Facial hair enthusiasts claim to have set a new world record for longest beard chain during an event in Wyoming on Friday. Participants gathered at Gaslight Social, a bar in Casper, where to participate, people needed to sport a beard at least 8 inches long. They stood side by side and clipped their beards together to create a hairy chain that was measured at 150 feet long. That's more than double the Guinness World Record of 62 feet 6 inches set in Germany in 2007. Now, listen to this. This is something that you've done, and we've all done it. You're walking around, doing your thing, minding your own business, and then suddenly you're thinking about a time in high school that you said something really dumb that you just wouldn't say now. Or that time where someone says, "Thank you, come again," and you say, "Yeah, you too." And you just kind of cringe and die of shame. So why do these negative memories seem to just pop into our heads? And why do we feel so embarrassed still when the occasion passed long ago? Well, neurons grow physical connections with each other through the overlapping information in these representations. For example, memories might share a type of context, such as different beaches you've been to or restaurants you've eaten at, occur at similar periods of life, such as childhood or during your college years, or have emotional and thematic overlap, such as times we have loved or argued with others. An initial activation of a memory could be triggered by an external stimuli from the environment, like sights, smells, tastes, sounds, and things like this, or internal stimuli, such as thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations. Once neurons containing these memories are activated, associated memories are then more likely to be recalled into conscious awareness. In fact, involuntary memories tend to be more negative than voluntary memories. So, negative memories also tend to have a stronger emotional tone than positive memories. Humans are more motivated to avoid bad outcomes, bad situations, and bad definitions of ourselves than to seek out good ones. And this is likely due to the pressing need for survival in the world, physically, mentally, and socially. The good news is memories are very adaptable. When we recall a memory, we can elaborate on it and change our thoughts, feelings to these past experiences. Reflecting, elaborating, and reframing that memory might involve remembering some aspects of it that did go well, integrating it with the idea that you stepped up to a challenge even though it was hard, and reminding yourself it's okay to feel anxious or disappointed about difficult things, and it doesn't make us a failure or a bad person. And this can then change our understanding of those past memories and past experiences. And instead of attempting to avoid those thoughts, allow them to come and go and not attach to them once you have changed the framework of those thoughts. I'm reading this article to you because look, we've all been there where you ask yourself, why am I thinking this? So I hope that this article that I read to you helped answer at least some of those questions. With that out of the way, let me talk about my guest. Michelle L. Hamilton earned her master's in history from San Diego State University. She is the author or editor of several books, including I Would Still Be Drowned in Tears, Spiritualism in Abraham Lincoln's White House, Mary Ball Washington, the mother of George Washington, and Virginia's Ghosts and Legends, Volume 1. Her latest books, Civil War Ghosts, Haunted Land, and Virginia's Haunted History are published by Haunted Road Media. She is a lifelong student of history and has worked as a docent at several museums across the country. She is currently the manager of the Mary Washington House in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Michelle, welcome to Shifting the Paradigm. How's everything?
Everything's good.
Good, good. Now, I have a lot of new listeners and viewers in the podcast world and on YouTube that may not be familiar with your work. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in the paranormal?
Well, my name is Michelle Hamilton. I currently live in Virginia, but I'm originally was born and raised in San Diego, California. And my love affair with the paranormal started when I was a teenager and I started working at an historic property called the Whaley House in Old Town San Diego, which was haunted and had a lot of really cool history. So that's where my two interests, my two passions of history and the paranormal kind of came together as I started as a young person researching the history of the property and also some of the ghostly accounts and trying to connect the dots to what was true, what was myth, and having a really fun time doing that. And I also went through San Diego State University, where I got my master's in history. And then after I got my master's, I moved with my family to Virginia. And I'm currently the manager of the Mary Washington House in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Mary Washington was the mother of George Washington. So it's a 1700s era house. So I manage that. And then I also, on the side, write still about ghosts and the history of the paranormal.
You touch on so many things that I want to get into. But before we even get into the books that you've written, which I do have a few questions on those, in this house that you are a manager of, the mother of George Washington, it's pretty darn old. Have you come across anything paranormal while working there? Or have you heard any stories regarding that location that's just kind of eerie?
Yes, in fact, if you follow us on our Facebook page, Mary Washington House, we're actually going to be having an event on November 19th. It's $10. It's called Spirits of the Mary Washington House, and I get to talk about some of the ghostly happenings or the spooky stories that happen there. So yeah, the house is very old. It was originally built in 1759. Mary Washington moves in 1772. She dies on the property in 1789. She lived there along with her enslaved workers. And then after that, her granddaughter lived in the house for a few years, and then it went through a series of owners. And then during the Civil War, it was used as a hospital for both Union and Confederate soldiers. And Union soldiers were actually buried in the backyard. We know of at least 6. They have been disinterred. They've now been moved to the National Cemetery in Fredericksburg. And then after that, it became a museum in 1890. It was saved in 1890. We opened our doors in 1900, and in fact, people still lived on the property until the 1970s as caretakers. So we've had a long history of people living on the property, long history of people who love that property very much. And yes, we do have a few spooky stories. A colonial woman was seen in the garden, and Mary Washington loved to garden. And we've also had interactions with possibly Civil War soldiers. We've had interactions possibly with past caretakers. The school was also a boys' school. And so we've had a lot of childhood pranks that would take place, especially in our gift shop where things get knocked off the shelves. Also, when we have school tours, and we're starting to have school tours again, there is a bookshelf door in Mary's bedroom that will open up. It's kind of like is whoever is welcoming the children back to the home.
Could you go into detail on these ghostly interactions that you've heard of, in the sense of were things moving or people seeing apparitions? What was going on? We've had the one story that I love about people actually seeing things is very rare at the property, but the story was years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, even longer than that, a gentleman was walking his dog by our house, and the backyard runs parallel with Lewis Street, so there is a sidewalk. So a gentleman was walking his dog, which people frequently do, and Fredericksburg is a wonderful town to do it. And his dog starts barking, and he looks up and he sees a woman in full colonial clothing, and she's leaning over like she is examining a plant. And the gentleman gets his dog to stop barking. He raises up to say, "I'm so sorry, ma'am, that my dog is barking at you." And when he looks back into the garden, there is nobody there. And this happened about 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, hours after the property was closed. We do wear period clothing, but our gardener does not. Needless to say, that would be very difficult to garden in full colonial clothing. And at that time, there was absolutely nobody at the house. So that's one of my favorite stories. I personally haven't seen anything. I've heard things. I've heard sounds, shuffling sounds, moving sounds. Like one time, me and my coworker were working the day after Christmas. It was very quiet, and we actually heard footsteps in the parlor. And wearing 1780s, 1790s shoes, there's a distinct little sound that they make on the hardwood floor. And what we were hearing was very similar to that of a woman shoe clicking on the floorboards. I've actually even heard the sounds of, I thought a barricade had been knocked over. So it was the same day, the day after Christmas. It was in 2020. I heard a sound, a slam, and I thought one of my barricades had fallen over upstairs. And I went to investigate, and nothing had been touched. Absolutely nothing to explain this very loud, very distinct sound.
So that's things that I have heard. I've walked into the gift shop and seen things off the shelves that ever they had fallen due to, house shifting or just, weight or gravity. It should have taken a lot of other products down with it. Instead, like the cookbook is laying in the middle of the floor and nothing has been knocked down and the book hasn't been dented from falling off the top shelf. We used to stock little British toy soldiers, and those would get knocked off the shelves like someone was flicking it. And I had a paranormal investigator group come in, and we were doing EVPs. And I said, okay, what is it about these British soldier toys that you do not like? And the response came back as, I don't like red coat. I said, okay, we'll get rid of them. So we sold them off and we haven't brought them back. And so the toy soldiers that we do have are Continental soldiers and they stay on the shelf.
Unbelievable. I just have one more question regarding that. And you mentioned that one of the books that fell from the top shelf wasn't dented in any way. How is something like that possible from your explanation?
I have no clue. I think the ghosts are just they're just playing a prank. I mean, because I try to look at it as skeptical, and sometimes I have some of my guests, my guides will get like everything's ghostly. It's like, well, no, not everything is ghostly. We are in a 250-year-old house, and things do, I can tell being there after hours, when the house is just doing what it does, and that's, we're in the South, so it's, you're going to hear pops from the woods expanding and contracting, and that's what it should be doing. I have no clue because I first tried to investigate, like, okay, what was the weight of the door slamming brings it down? Didn't happen. Was it too top heavy? No, I have no clue.
In your book, Civil War Ghosts, you look at newspaper articles from 1860 to about 1865 by journalists that weren't afraid to write about paranormal activity. What was the mentality of ghosts at that time?
Well, see, we've always been fascinated with ghosts from the very beginning of time. And also, the United States primarily European extraction at this time, and all the European countries have stories of the ghosts, goblins, imps, fairies. And then in 1848, which is about 12 years before the Civil War, there's a religion that comes up called Spiritualism, and Spiritualism is where we get ghost hunting from. And Spiritualism is the belief, and is based very strongly in the Christian faith, but is based on the idea that God is a loving God. He's not the judgeful, unmerciful God of the Puritans, but that this God is a loving God, and that when he calls a person home to be with him in heaven, he still wants those who are living to have interactions with their departed loved ones. And so they will refer to it as the gates ajar, meaning the gates of heaven are left open a little bit so that the spirits of the dead can come through and speak to the living. And that would happen through a person called a medium. Kind of like we have psychic mediums today. This is where, for the first time, that became a profession for people, primarily young women, young girls, 14, 15, 12. I've seen some as young as 12, 10, 12 upwards could be mediums that they said that they are born with it and that the spirits came through and talked to them in seances. And so this became very popular in the 1850s, and then the Civil War happens and all of these people die, and people are left wondering what happened to my loved ones. Are they okay? And so spiritualism becomes even more popular. So ghosts in the 1860s are not so much the ghosts we have today with the unfinished business. It's more of ghosts are trying to communicate that they're all right. But also we're starting to see the beginnings of ghosts that we see today, if that makes sense, because so many of them died in such horrible ways. So we have stories that I talk about in my book where Union soldiers, like in West Virginia, which was a divided state of both Confederate and Union. And so Union soldiers who were fighting for the North are at a place where Confederates had passed away at. And so they're saying the ghosts of the Confederates are haunting them and are making their sleep uncomfortable, so they have to leave that area. So we're starting to see a shifting of ghosts being benevolent to ghosts with issues with things they're trying to get across.
In that book, how many articles were you able to collect, and which ones seemed the most compelling?
I didn't count how many. It was a lot. It was a lot that I know at least 100 or more. What I found the most compelling were the accounts from the soldiers themselves, the ones who were in the front lines, the ones who are just trying to survive, or trying to survive the war, just trying to make it home. And then all of a sudden, something is happening. There's an account at Fort Delaware, which is a Union fortress, which was being used as a prisoner of war camp for Confederate soldiers. And a Confederate prisoner of war had been exchanged, and he's going home, and he's giving an interview in the Southern newspapers. And he is talking about a Confederate ghost that was haunting his Union captors. So things like that, the things that they're not looking for ghosts, but ghosts find them.
So then when it comes to ghost activity, ghost encounters, do you think it's pure luck? Is it random? Or could it possibly be that people are pre-selected to have encounters?
I think it's a little bit of everything. Sometimes things just happen to you. And sometimes the person may have a connection to the site or a connection to the spirit. I don't know what makes a ghost decide that they want to talk to a certain person.
Now, you definitely cannot talk about ghosts and the Civil War and seances without talking about Abraham Lincoln and his family. So he and his wife endured a lot of loss, not just for the country, but even in their family. What does your book, I Would Still Be Drowned in Tears, Spiritualism in Abraham Lincoln's White House, say about how they coped with that?
Yes, that's the story of how they coped. And one of the ways that they coped was through attending spiritualist mediums. It had, again, it's this cluster of timing that we have the creation of spiritualism. Spiritualism had been around for 12 years, so it's already pretty firmly established in American culture by the Civil War. The Lincolns were aware of spiritualism. Before the Civil War, spiritualist mediums would go on tour across the country, and they came through Springfield, Illinois, where the Lincolns were from. And so, though I have no evidence to say that the Lincolns attended a seance or a spiritualist lecture before 1862, they're aware of it because they are reading the newspapers. They are aware of what is going on, and people are talking about this religious idea. Because I mean, people did view it as a religion, and then the Civil War happens, and not only is there massive death, and the Lincolns are losing friends and family members, but their own son Willie dies in February of 1862 from typhoid fever, and he was one of their favorite child. He was very sweet, very bright, the most like Abraham Lincoln in temperament. And so it's absolutely devastating. And Mary Lincoln goes into a deep depression, and she did not handle the losses in her life easy. And this was the second child that the Lincolns had lost. Willie was 12. It was devastating, and Mary goes into a deep depression. And one of the ways she comes out of it is through attending spiritualist seances. And there was Washington, D.C. being the capital city, there was actually a lot of spiritualists, a very thriving community. And Mary is interested in it. She brings Abraham along. He finds it interesting. And for the remainder of Lincoln's life, they are both attending, both him and Mary, until 65, are attending seances fairly regularly at the White House and at other locations. And I'm one of the first historians. In fact, that was on the basis of my master's thesis. That's why I got my master's in history from, was through that study. That though I won't say that he was a spiritualist himself, but he was definitely interested in it, and he was more interested in it than traditional biographers are willing to admit.
At that time, how did seances coexist with the Lincoln family's Catholic faith?
The Lincolns were not Catholic; they were Protestant. It kind of went along the idea that heaven is for everyone. The idea that God is a loving God. Mary was nominally an Episcopalian and a Presbyterian throughout her life. Lincoln himself never joined an established church. He always said that he would follow any church that put Jesus's creed of love your neighbor as yourself and love God, and that would be his religion. So it allowed the belief that you could still go to heaven even if you did not belong to an established church, even if you were not baptized into an established church. Because before this, many Protestant denominations were still preaching that if a child did not get baptized, that means the child did not have a moment where they were born again, that they were old enough to have read the Bible and to have accepted Jesus Christ as their Savior, that if they did not have that moment, then it was unsure ever the child would make it to heaven. So here is a religion that says God loves everybody. You don't have to be a part of an established church. All children are good and pure. And so you will see Willie again. You will see Eddie again, their other son. You will see the members of your family that have died in the Confederate Army. You will see them in heaven again. And for the Lincolns, especially Mary, as she said, that's what the quote of my book says, I would still be drowned in tears. Ever she did not have her faith in spiritualism. She tells her sister, there would be no hope for her.
It kind of goes to show when it comes to attempting to communicate with the dead, it gives you that sense of closure that you're not really that separated from them, even though that they have passed on, you're still able to have that communication. And for many, that gives them this sense of happiness, that sense of warmth. So why do you think that overall it's not public knowledge that President Lincoln conducted seances in the White House?
Mainly because Mary has been, until recently, has been classified as being eccentric, being crazy. She was later in her life forcibly committed into a mental institution, and there was a lot going on with that was more than just mental illness. But yeah, she did have probably depression. I know some historians have speculated that she had bipolar, was bipolar. But it's very difficult to diagnose a person 120 years after their death. So it was easy to put the blame on Mary. It's easy historians are uncomfortable with spiritualism because it may not be something that they spiritually share themselves. Because it is something that even today is seen out of the norm. Nancy Reagan was into astrology and would have her astrologer analyze Ronald Reagan's daily schedule. That is still seen as unusual, as funny, things that people are not comfortable discussing. So I think it has more to do with a reticence against going into someone's faith that you may not be comfortable with. Also, I think because Lincoln was not a member of established church, it's easy to attach your beliefs to him. That's where almost every religion has tried to say that at some point Lincoln converted into their religion. But also for somebody that is seen as being so wise, so practical, so rational, it's a part of that person's life that some scholars don't like. They don't like their heroes to have faults.
Of course not. That makes perfect sense. You know, when you are presenting your work, you're going to bring your ego with that. And if it gets bruised, well, that's going to be an issue. I do have more questions relating to Abraham Lincoln, but we are coming towards a break. We'll be right back.
Gigawatt paranormal powerhouse, KUNX-DB, the X.
This is Micah Hanks of the Micah Hanks program right here on KUNX. And right now, you're having your paradigm shifted by the one and only Cristina Gomez.
Your new source for alternative talk radio on the internet. The X.
Howdy, folks. This is Lou Elizondo, and you are listening to my very good friend Cristina Gomez on Shifting the Paradigm.
Do you have an interest in the paranormal? Then you'll love the unxnetwork.com. The X is your streaming audio and video for everything supernatural, strange, and mysterious, like UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, and so much more. From hosts like Jimmy Church, Whitley Strieber, Micah Hanks, and Cristina Gomez. Visit the unxnetwork.com show page for a complete list of all the paranormal programs you'll find on the X. Be sure to follow us on Twitter for updates at KUNXDB. Follow our Facebook group, UNX Network. Find the podcast on Spotify, iHeart, Audible, and Apple Podcast. It's time.
It's new.
It's the X.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Explaining the unexplained. The new unxnetwork.com.
Hi, this is Race Hobbs, head of programming at the new UNX Network, and you're locked on Shifting the Paradigm with the intrepid Cristina Gomez on the X.
This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you are in the future because you're listening to Cristina Gomez and Shifting the Paradigm.
Live in the moment. I'm gonna chase it, and I'm gonna chase it. I know we can't ignore it, no matter how hard we try. And I'm gonna chase it, and I'm gonna chase it. I know we can't ignore it, no matter how hard we try. Fire in the veins, I fight to gain, breaking all the rules to keep me sane.
Welcome back. With me today is Michelle Hamilton. You mentioned in your book, I Would Still Be Drowned in Tears, Spiritualism in Abraham Lincoln's White House, that in 1828, he had visited New Orleans, which was before he became president, and he interacted with a voodoo fortune teller. What happened when he got exposed to that?
We know a lot of things. One of the most abhorrent moments in Lincoln's young life, he's only in his early 20s, is when he goes on a flatboat to New Orleans to sell cargo, to sell goods down the Mississippi River from Illinois to Mississippi. It was the superhighway of the day. So Lincoln, for the first time, is being taken out of his neighborhood, his culture, his community, and he is going down into New Orleans. And for the first time in his life, he is seeing slavery for the first time. He sees his first slave auction. And according to his cousin, who recorded these stories about him attending the voodoo, meeting the voodoo priestess, when Lincoln saw a slave auction for the first time, he is said to have told his cousin, I ever get a chance to hit this thing, I will hit it hard, meaning he will go after slavery somehow and try to help hurt the system, to help bring the end of a system. Lincoln, from a very young age, always thought it was unjust for a person to make another person work and then collect all of the profits for it. He always thought that was unfair because as a child, he had to work and then give the money that he raised to his father. And they had a very strained relationship. So on a personal level, Lincoln always thought slavery was unjust. And then when he sees it in his face and he sees the slave auction, it absolutely disgusts him. So also during this trip, he, like many tourists today, they go to New Orleans and they get a reading. And he had a reading with a voodoo priestess. I know some people try to say it was Marie Laveau. We don't know who it was. And again, we have to trust Lincoln's cousin that he's telling the truth, that this story even happened. But it seems logical that he would go to that as part of being in New Orleans and seeing the culture. He would have had some interaction with the voodoo religion and the voodoo culture. And the voodoo fortune teller looks at his hand and basically says, you are the man, through your hand, you are the person that will strike down slavery. That your hand will bring about the end of slavery. And she says, I only wish I was a younger woman, that I could live to see what you were going to accomplish. And so we have these two stories of Lincoln in New Orleans seeing slavery, saying, I want to end this, I want to hit it hard. And then a voodoo priest is saying, your hand is going to be the one that will end this.
You mentioned Mary Laveau, and this is a common name in the paranormal field, but I'll be honest with you, I'm actually not familiar with her and her story. Can you give us just a little bit of a brief overview of who this woman is and her significance when it comes to so many paranormal investigators?
Okay, Marie Laveau, she is known as a voodoo. They call her the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. She was a African-American woman of mixed heritage. She had Afro-Caribbean and Native American indigenous bloodline. She was known for being very beautiful, and she was also known for being in voodoo. She started her career as a hairdresser. So as a free woman of color, she was born free. She was never enslaved. Her father was Anglo, so she was born free. And but she had a career which was very very rare outside of New Orleans. New Orleans had a vibrant free population of African Americans. But she served as a hairdresser, so she knew a lot of the white women's secrets, and she would offer spells, charms to help anybody, for a price, get out of a certain predicament. And so she was very prominent in New Orleans society. She lived to her 80s, so she's born around the early 1800s, and she passes away in the 1880s. Her daughter also becomes a major figure in voodoo culture after that. So some historians speculate that some of the things that Marie Laveau did, actually was her daughter who was Laveau. And so when anybody tries to say anything about like, oh, it's a voodoo, Lincoln met with a voodoo fortune teller. Well, Marie Laveau is the most prominent person, so it had to have been Marie Laveau. Likely not. There was other practitioners of the voodoo faith in New Orleans, like there is today. And Marie Laveau's grave in New Orleans, I think it's in St. Louis Cemetery number 1, is a major tourist attraction. You can only see it now through scheduled tours because there's been so much vandalism in the cemetery proper. But the people will still go to Marie Laveau's grave. They used to put cross marks on, 3 cross marks to get their wish. Now they knock on it 3 times, leave an offering, and it's believed that Marie Laveau will grant your request. She's also, her spirit is seen or said to be seen in the French Quarter, and also by Bayou St. John, where she would perform some of her rituals, and she is seen with her snake. That was her pet, and so people say that they see Marie Laveau and her pet python in New Orleans today.
A pet python?
That's also in voodoo, snakes are part of the ritual too. You'll still see that they'll as part of the, because it comes from Africa, it comes from the Caribbean, and blending with Catholicism. So part of the ritual sometimes is to have their snake or python, and that they will use as part of their ritual.
That takes some bravery right there. I'll be honest with you. Mm-hmm. Do you think seances and being exposed, in a sense, to the supernatural affected Abraham Lincoln's work during his presidential reign?
I think it did. I think he's a very empathic person. He was a person that liked to listen to the opinions of others. He called it taking his public baths. He encouraged all politicians to bathe frequently, meaning don't get in the bathtub, though that would probably help also, but to talk to your constituents, talk to your people, understand what the common person felt. And so when spiritualists are conducting their seances, and they admitted that they offered political advice, though they would always say, oh, it wasn't my personal belief, it's the belief of the spirits. The spirits are telling me what to say. The spirits are telling me to tell Lincoln to sign the Emancipation Proclamation because it will be the thing that you will be known for in history, that you will go down in history, and that your name will be, honored for this. And so they would offer him advice like that. They gave him an idea of because the mediums at this time period, they were primarily Republicans. And being a Republican back then meant that you were more on the progressive end. You were in favor of abolition. You're in favor of women's rights. You're in favor of prison reforms for the treatment of the mentally ill. So they were on the edge of politics. And so when they would channel, especially these young women, they would always say, well, I went into the political realm and I talked about, the abolitionist movement. I talked about women's rights, but it wasn't what I believed in. It was what the spirits were telling me, because in heaven, everyone's equal. Everyone is free. The spirits are saying, treat the mentally ill as you would, treat your neighbor. The gospels of love your neighbor, take care of your neighbor. Don't chain up your mentally ill cousin. That kind of thing. And so it would have had an effect on Lincoln. He would have been aware of their counsel. He would have, and then figured out the best way possible that he could enact what he believed was right.
That is truly incredible to say what you're going to do and then you actually do it, and to really treat everyone as your neighbor and treat them how you want to be treated is so important. And yet, while that quote is ancient, some of us still do not practice that today. Now, you have extensively written and researched about eloquence and manners during the Civil War. How did that influence people when talking about or being interested in the paranormal?
Their vocabulary was so advanced than ours. When you even look at what a 12-year-old, most people would have what we consider to be a 5th or 6th grade education. And when you read about the writing, even people like Nettie Colburn, their grammar may be erratic, but and Nettie Colburn was one of the Lincoln's favorite mediums. But their ideas of, expressing how they wanted things done was so eloquent. And so I think it was a heightened sense. They read the Bible in the King James version. We have to have the Bible in all the modern day language. I'm sure they're probably going to come out with an emoji Bible eventually, but they're reading the King James Bible. They're reading the works of Shakespeare without Cliff Notes. So yes, they had a much more expansive vocabulary. They could probably cuss you out and tell you to go to hell, and you would enjoy the trip. And much more. They could be blunt. They could be just as crude as we are today, but they did it in a much more elegant way. They definitely had a way of telling stories to heighten the feelings, heighten even their mockery. And you see that especially in the Civil War Ghost book, where these are male journalists who are writing about encounters that primarily women have had. And so you definitely see their sexism. You're also going to see a lot of language today that we would consider, inappropriate about other racial groups and other religious beliefs. But it was a way of telling a story. It was a way of filling out a newsprint. It was also a way to serve as entertainment, because people read the newspapers to be informed, but also be entertained. And ghost stories were part of the news and also part of entertainment.
And that's definitely still the case today. We read the news, we read articles to be informed, but most importantly, to be entertained and to kill time, especially if you're in a car, on a train, things like this. So some believe that the 13 colonies are pretty haunted places, as there was so much bloodshed between the Pilgrims and the Indians. What are your thoughts on this compared to other states?
All states have their bloody history. And also you have to realize that the 13 colonies were, yes, they definitely are haunted. And all of them are, but also the other states were also being settled during the colonial era, but many times they're being settled by the French or the Spanish. So they have as equally as bloody battles. I'm from San Diego, and there was bloody battles between the Spanish and the Native Americans, even at the missions. And those were also in town. Growing up, we knew that the San Diego mission was haunted. So it's the land. The land has always been bloody. And we do have, especially on the East Coast, I think we documented it just a little bit better. But all of our states are haunted. I think like in New England, definitely in the South here, we've had the same people, the same families, and so they can document their stories and their family history better. So I think maybe that's where we get the idea that, let's say, Massachusetts is more haunted than Southern California. Both are equally old. Both are settled within a 100-year period of each other. Both had equally bloody battles between the settlers and the Native Americans. Both had atrocities on both sides. Just New England is more settled and more older, and California is more transitory and more younger. So those stories tend to get neglected. Also, there's a little bit of a language gap. It's a little easier to read Old English than it read older Spanish that is in a Spanish Castilian dialect versus an English dialect. And so that takes another breed of historian who can go through and actually learn to decipher 18th century Spanish. I knew one of my professors could do that, and it was just incredibly difficult.
While we're on that thought, looking at, in a sense, the old with the new, do you think that old towns, old cities are more haunted than our more modern cities, or are they equal with their hauntings?
We're equal. We have new buildings here in Fredericksburg, and we know they're haunted. My Barnes and Nobles, they call her the border ghost. They had a paranormal investigation for Halloween last week, and it turned out they have two ghosts, and they date to the Civil War. And the building was built in the early late 90s. You go somewhere. There used to be a 7-Eleven not too far from my house. I knocked it down to expand the road. The local myth of that 7-Eleven was they kept the radio up high because the cashiers didn't want to hear the ghosts. Our local Target is haunted. It's just the land. It's the land. So I don't think age of a building is a requisite for a ghost.
So let's say a building was taken down, right? And it was haunted before. It's going to remain haunted even if there's a new building on top of that. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, Colonial Williamsburg there's about 300 buildings, I want to say, in Colonial Williamsburg. Half of those are modern buildings that were built to look like the original colonial structure. They're going onwards to about 100 years old, but Colonial Williamsburg is insanely haunted. It's because it's the land. It's the land in which those buildings are built on.
And in your opinion, how is the land able to retain that energy or those entities? Because again, it's not the building, it's not the attachments to any object. From your explanation, it's from the land. How is something like that possible from your knowledge?
Yeah, I know there's some theories that it's the quartz may be in the ground because quartz is a crystal, and quartz can store memory. We use it in our computers. We use it on our clocks. But beyond that, I don't know. I think that's also one of the great mysteries of hauntings is how can a modern building be haunted even though it's on a 200-year-old battlefield, but the building wasn't there. I know somebody that her house was built on around an old farmhouse, and she saw the ghost walk through, or the memory of the ghost, the residual energy walking through her house, but their house wouldn't have looked anything like her house.
That is honestly so cool. And you are right. These are the big mysteries that so many of us want answers to. And it seems like we won't get them until we cross over. Yeah. Out of all of the time periods, why are you fixated on the 1800s the most? What is it about that time period that resonates with you?
I has always had a fascination with the Civil War era. Now that I'm working of the Mary Washington House. I'm just as fascinated with the 18th century. I think the 18th and the 19th century, it is, the people are so relatable at one end, but at the other end, it's such a separate era. So you can recognize yourself a little bit in the people and the time, but then also there's so much about their life today that is not compatible. That is like, it's almost like, a foreign land. So at one point they're relatable, but at the point that they're not. It's just a fascinating period of time. People are, it doesn't matter what century you're in, people are always going to fall in love. People are always going to have love, hate, jealousy. Funny things are going to happen. Someone's going to get drunk and do something stupid and they're going to record about it. Today we just have videos. I mean, at work we talk about, in the 18th century, what would have been the famous last words? Hey guys, watch this. What would have been, what would they have been doing that today we would post on YouTube? So that is relatable. Their ideas of gender, their ideas of racial feelings, not an equal at all era. That is where it feels so foreign. But at the same time, people are people. So you're always going to have love, hate, jealousy. People are going to love their children. People are going to love their pets. So that is what is relatable, is the human element.
Being so fascinated in those time periods, if given the opportunity, would you go back in time and live those periods, or would you rather stay in modern times?
I would much rather stay in modern times for the health benefits alone. I mean, I wouldn't last like 5 seconds back then. I'd be accused of being a witch and strung up. But no, I think it's fascinating to study, but I certainly wouldn't want to live there.
I can relate to that. Looking at some of the things that I've looked into, which isn't much when it comes to that time period, I'm thinking it was very difficult back then. And while their clothes were super cute, a little bit too thick for me and too many layers. And I feel like I would just be sweaty walking around everywhere, just like dripping in sweat.
Yeah, I've worn period clothing. You sweat. You sweat. I mean, some of the reenactors go, "Oh, we are just as comfortable today in this clothing as wearing your clothes." Like, no, because at the end of the day, we can still pop the corset off and put the bra back on and be much more comfortable. It's like people would ask me when I was guiding, like, in August, "Are you hot?" I'm like, "Yeah, but you're hot too. We're just going to get me hot together."
Geez, that is so funny. And I remember back in school, we would visit these locations where people were dressed in their periodic clothing. And it truly is so magical to attempt to walk through a time machine, a TARDIS, if I can say that, and to be a part of that environment with the people who are dressed up, they're using the right language. The house or the mansion is in the same kind of apparel, but you wouldn't call it apparel when it comes to houses, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And it's so magical for kids and adults to go through something like that. So first off, I want to say thank you so much for all the things that you do and bringing that magic in present day from quite some time ago.
And one time I had a little boy on a tour, and it was a school group, and he stops and he goes, "This is like an adventure of space and time. This is like being in an episode of Doctor Who."
It's exactly like that, 100%.
Well, we won't, except for the monsters running across. So we would have to be in a Hartnell era historical, because we don't have the monsters running through yet.
And I'm okay with that. I don't think I'm ready to fight off some monsters anytime soon.
No, yeah, I couldn't tell the difference between a Zygon and which one was the real Queen Elizabeth.
There you go. I can tell you're a real fan. We're going to get into that a little bit later. But from your knowledge, did any other presidents participate in seances or have an intense interest in the paranormal?
Yes. In fact, Lincoln was not the first president to have a seance in the White House. The first goes to the Pierce administration, which is 2 administrations before him. And they actually invited the Fox sisters, who were considered to be the founders of spiritualism. There's 2 sisters, Leah and Kate. They were young girls from New York, and they had a haunting in their house, and through that, they claimed to be mediums and to communicate with the dead. And so they came to New York, to Washington, D.C. to set up, they would set up a parlor in a hotel, and people would come in and have seances. And the Pierces had just this even more of a tragic backstory than Lincoln's. President Pierce and his wife, Jane Pierce, they had
Michelle, I do apologize, but we are actually coming towards a break. We're going to get into that story in detail. Hang tight. We will be right back after this.
Gigawatt paranormal powerhouse, KUNX-DB, The X.
This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you are in the future because you're listening to Cristina Gomez and Shifting the Paradigm.
I want to thank all of you for listening to The X. But did you know you can watch live streaming video and catch your favorite video casts on the UNX Network YouTube channel?
Wow, you mean I can watch the X shows anytime?
That's right. Watch any show, anytime, even binge watch your favorite programs.
Which shows are on the UNX Network YouTube channel?
You can watch Most Haunted with Dan Terry, Entity Voices, Paranormal Evidence, Paranormally Blonde, and Unexplained Phenomena Australia, and many more. Also, be sure and catch live coverage of special events and special broadcasts from the UNX Network.
That's great. I'm going to subscribe to the UNX Network channel right now.
Awesome. You can find everything you need to know about the YouTube channel at unxnetwork.com. That's unxnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for everything unexplained. It's the new mainstream. It's the UNX Network.
Explaining the unexplained. The new unxnetwork.com.
Are you ready to read about true paranormal events? UNX Media publishes nonfiction books about UFOs, ghosts and haunted places, time anomalies, cryptid creatures, and more. Just like KUNX-DB Radio, it's all about unexplained phenomena. Visit www.unxmedia.com to see our list of great book titles by Debbie Ziegelmeyer, Gene Walker, Devin Listrom, Wayne Lawrence, Bill Spicer, and yours truly, Margie Kay. That's unxmedia.com.
Gold loves chaos, uncertainty, and disarray. History shows us what gold does when people aren't sure about the government, the stock market, their jobs, or their retirement savings. Our national debt is skyrocketing. Gold and other precious metals are a defense measure against inflation and a stock market that might take years to recover. So what can you do right now to protect yourself? Call United Gold Group. We offer gold and other precious metals delivered securely within 72 hours. Are you worried about the stock market? We can also help you set up a real gold or silver IRA or a 401k. Safe and secure. United Gold Group makes gold ownership affordable. Call now and get up to $2,500 in free gold or silver with a qualified IRA. Call 800-753-8534. That's 800-753-8534 or visit unitedgoldgroup.com.
were just talking about the Pierce family, and apparently they had a more tragic background than the Lincolns. What happened with them?
So President Pierce and his wife Jane had 4 sons, and before he became president, 3 of the 4 had passed away. They died very young, and they were devoted parents to their youngest child named Benjamin. And in fact, Jane Pierce did not want her husband to run as president, was not happy that he won, was not happy that she was going to have to go to Washington, D.C. And so they are traveling in March. And because up into the 20th century, inaugurations took place in March because of travel. The winter time is very difficult to travel. And so they're traveling in early March to go to Washington, D.C. They are on a train. The train derails. And in the accident, their young son, Benny, is the only fatality. And he died in the most awful way possible. The trunk that was in the compartment above him actually came down on him, and it got him in the back of the neck and nearly decapitated this little boy in front of his parents. And so now they have lost all of their children. And Jane, needless to say, is beside herself in grief. They actually call her the widow of the White House because she did not do any formal functions as First Lady. And so as part of her grief, the Fox sisters come and do a couple seances in the White House. And in fact, the shock jock demon in the White House tries to blame Mary and Jane for releasing a demon to the White House. But that documentary is actually based off of a fiction horror novel called The President, which is pure fiction. So that was one of the first seances in the White House. We know the Lincolns were interested in seances. We know people are saying the White House is haunted as early as the Grant administration, which is 2 administrations after Lincoln. And then there is stories that during World War II, FDR had a seance had a medium come into the Oval Office to give him some advice on how long his lifespan was going to be in 1945 when his health was failing. She says that she snuck her crystals in her muff when the Secret Service had to check and let her in. She snuck her crystals in and came into the Oval Office and was giving FDR a reading. And FDR kept asking her, how much more time do I have to get certain goals done? And she kept telling him, you have very little, Mr. President, you have very little time. And she was right. He was gone within 2 months of this meeting. And so we know that. And then, of course, the Reagans did have an intense interest in all paranormal topics. They were fascinated by UFOs. It's on the record that they had at least 2 to 3 UFO sightings. And also Mrs. Reagan would have her favorite medium or astrologer look at Ronald's schedule to see what was the best days to meet like Mikhail Gorbachev, what was the best days so that from his chart that he could get some of his goals across and have big, powerful meetings. So what were the best days for that? And I know it's unproven, but there are rumors that even the Clintons were interested in seances. There is one story I have heard that Hillary Clinton tried to have a seance to talk to the spirit of Eleanor Roosevelt during some of their political troubles in their administration.
So it seems to be a somewhat consistent theme for presidents of the United States to have some interest in the paranormal and or to have some type of communication with them, usually for a type of political help. But my question is, do you believe that the United States White House is haunted? You personally?
I think there's enough stories to support that claim. I mean, I haven't been there and talked to the ghost of Lincoln, but I think, and also, again, how many important things have happened in that building, how many earth-shattering moments that presidents have felt there. President, like Lincoln lost a child there. children have been born there. Also, President Wilson's wife died in the White House. So there's been weddings at the White House. So there's been so many good things. There's also been so many bad things or hard things, just the energy from the assassinations that have taken place, the grief, 9/11, the attack on Pearl Harbor, things, the president's mulling over going to war, so, who lives, who dies. I think on even a spiritual level, just the energy alone of those struggles would embed itself into the ground.
There are people that explain that usually when they enter, not usually, but at times when they enter a building, there's this sense of heaviness, these emotions of sorts. Do you think that's the case for the White House? I mean, you get tourists going in, you get a lot of important people coming in all the time. And myself personally, I haven't come across any stories like that. Have you, where someone states this place felt weird?
I haven't heard that, but I know Reagan's daughter did not like staying in the Lincoln bedroom, and the Lincoln bedroom is actually Abraham Lincoln's original office. So I know that besides the bed being really uncomfortable, but also that bed in the Lincoln bedroom is also the bed that Willie died in. They called that the Prince of Wales bed because the Prince of Wales in the 1850s had stayed in that on that bed. But that is actually the bed that Willie died. Needless to say, not the same mattress, but that is actually the bed that Willie Lincoln died in. So we have, and then also that's Lincoln's former office, his Lincoln bedroom. And I know people will say maybe that the room itself has a feeling. I know Reagan also had a dog that refused to go into the Lincoln bedroom. So I don't maybe there's parts of the White House that have feelings, not the whole building itself.
Okay, no, that in a sense would make more sense. Well, there would be certain rooms or certain locations that might feel a little bit different than the entire building as a whole. Now, we're going to shift gears just a little bit. While you are a paranormal investigator and historian, have you ever come across a more UFO type of experience when conducting research in a location that has paranormal activity?
No, I have not. I'm interested in UFOs and I think we all are right now. Especially it's fascinating the time that we're living in, where we're seeing things like NASA is going to have a UFO discussion. I've not seen like in any of my paranormal researching saying, "Oh yeah, by the way, at this site we've seen a UFO." I haven't had that yet.
Are you wanting it to happen?
I would love to see a light in the sky as long as they don't pick me up. I mean, I don't want missing time after this. We're not, I don't want to, be ghosted by an alien. But, sure, I think anybody would be fascinated to say, hey, I saw something in the sky I couldn't understand.
So do you believe that there is a convergence between the paranormal and the UFO phenomenon?
Anything's possible. I know people have also seen, we'll go into Bigfoot in UFOs and ghosts. And I know there's, I've heard stories like in cemeteries that were known to be haunted. Sometimes, out in the country, Bigfoot seen coming through. I mean, anything's possible. We don't understand enough about hauntings to say yes or no. So I kind of like that anything's possible. And, people say that they see things. Who am I to say that they're wrong? I wasn't there. I don't know who these people are.
There are those that claim that during times of reenacting the Civil War, for instance, in the exact locations where the war took place, some people see ghosts. But from your knowledge, are these residual ghosts or interactive ghosts?
A little bit of both. One of my favorite stories, and it comes from Mark Nesbitt's books about Gettysburg, which are a must. They're really great. And if you ever have a chance to go to Gettysburg, I highly recommend stopping and go to Gettysburg. I know during most of the year on Friday and Saturday nights, Mark Nesbitt tries to be at his store to sign his books, and he is a person, wonderful, wonderful man to talk to about ghosts. And he talks about, and it's one of my favorite stories, that I think it was during the 130th. So this would have been in 1993. there was a reenactment in Gettysburg, and the Gettysburg reenactment is not on national park property. It's off-site. But these reenactors, at the end of the day, instead of going back to their camp and drinking beer, they actually wanted to go up to Little Round Top, which is a major part of the battle, and just watch the sunset. It is so gorgeous out there watching the sunset. And they're up at Little Round Top, and they're watching the sunset, and next thing they hear is shuffling out of the bushes, and this, what they thought was a Union reenactor, comes shuffling out, and they're looking at him, man, this man is incredible. Look at the detail on his uniform. It looks like he's been through the battle. He's all battle stained, and the reenactor says to the other group, it's been a tough day's fight, hasn't it? And they're like, yeah, it has been. And they're thinking, well, wow, he's staying in character. This is amazing. And the reenactor reaches into his pocket and says, here, boys, you may need this tomorrow. And he hands them rolled up cartridges, which were used to load the gun. That would have a ball they call a minigun or Minet ball, and it had also had gunpowder that they would pour down the barrel, and they put the gun in, they ram the barrel down, and then they would be able to fire. And they're looking at this, and they're like, this is amazing. And before they look up to say anything, like, where did you get these? The guy completely disappeared. And then they're looking more closely at the cartridges. It wasn't blank cartridges. It was a live ball, and it was black powder. Both of those are not allowed in reenacting because he could kill somebody with that. And they, because he gave them 3. They took one, and they had an expert analyze it. It was an 1860s made cartridge with correct wadding, correct black powder, everything, pristine bullet. And then they went the next day to ask around, who is this person handing out live ammo? They could not find him. No one knew who they're talking about. Nobody was handing out live ammo at this reenactment.
How is something like that possible? If that really was a ghost that doesn't necessarily have a physical form, how is it able to hold an object, a legitimate object, and give it to someone else the way that this entity did? Do you have any possible explanation for something like that?
I mean, maybe, what's the theory about, time dimensions? Maybe time is just all stacked up at once and we're the ghosts. I mean, maybe it was, a moment in time where the two paths crossed and somebody came, he came into their time period and went back into his time period. I mean, that's, who knows? I mean, I was one time talking to a relic hunter, and he goes, there's days we go out and we find all these bullets in a tree, and then we get everything and we clean the tree out, and then the next day we come back and there's fresh bullets in it. So he goes, they let us discover what they want us to, and that time is just just a concept.
That's a really fascinating theory, and not one that I've heard from very many paranormal investigators, where time is practically stacking up on top of itself, on top of each other. It's very, very cool. So while we're on this conversation, what is your paranormal equipment of choice while on investigations?
I'm a new investigator, so I'm just trying to learn how to use the EVP. I think that's kind of my favorite. And I do have a K2 meter. I'm still trying to figure that out. I just kind of sometimes use my senses myself, because most of the paranormal investigations that I have been on per se I'm hosting them at my museum. So I'm following around the other paranormal investigators to make sure they don't touch Mary's teapot, because if they do, I tell them there will be another ghost at this location, and it'll be them. So mainly I've just learned from following around other paranormal investigators. I think EVPs are fun because you kind of get to ask questions, and I try to coach it in terms that they would understand, because I do have a little bit more understanding of the language of the period. So that's kind of my favorite.
While we're on the conversation of EVPs, here's my question. When you are just attempting to speak to an entity, is there ever a language barrier there? Or is there, in the sense where for you have a better understanding of how they spoke during that time period? From your understanding, do they understand anything that is being said? Or does it have to be very directed and specific, usually in the lingo that they used in their time period?
I think it depends on how aware the spirit is. I think some are more aware that time has passed than others. But I think understanding the period, you're going to get better results. One time at the Mary Washington House, we had a group that was asking, well, how did you decorate for Halloween? They didn't. Halloween wasn't celebrated in the 18th century. It's more of a modern 20th century holiday. So, no way would a colonial ghost know how to answer that question or answer. That was not a holiday in their time period. I think also understanding slang helps. I remember one time, I forget, I think it was at the Whaley House where somebody was saying, was hearing one of the ghosts calling one of the mediums a chit, and they thought they were calling it a shit. Chit, C-H-I-T, is a slang for saucy girl versus with the meaning of S-H-I-T. So kind of understanding what the slang was at the time, understanding that holidays and the meanings of holidays have changed. That kind of thing. I try to like have a conversation with them. I don't want to talk to them about how they died. I think that's kind of rude. So I'll ask them, what was your favorite Bible verse? What was your favorite song? That kind of thing.
Did the first president of the United States, George Washington, have any ghost encounters? Because it's said that his Mount Vernon home is extremely haunted.
He did not have any that were documented during his lifetime. The stories about Washington encountering angels, those come, and that story comes actually before the Civil War, where it was presented as a morality tale, as a tale of we were going down a bad road, and we have to think about what Civil War means. So people were trying to stop the Civil War, or using it as a morality tale, the story of Washington seeing angels at Mount Vernon, not Mount Vernon, but at Valley Forge. That was something that only hits the press in 1859, which is right before the Civil War starts, when people are starting to see that war is coming. So not during Washington's life, but yes, ever since the 1830s, there has been stories of Washington being seen at Mount Vernon. In fact, even for Halloween on the George Washington's Mount Vernon Facebook page, they were talking about ghost stories that people have seen. George has been sensed at Mount Vernon, his wife Martha, the enslaved workers have been seen, they've heard children, even their dog has been seen at Mount Vernon in the kitchens. And so I think, again, that was a place where George was the most happiest, was at Mount Vernon, had a lot of really good memories there for him. And maybe that's a place where either if it's not an active haunting, is a place where that feeling is still embedded there.
Have seances been conducted there, or have mediums been there that have attempted to communicate with George Washington?
Not officially. Again, the Mount Vernon, only in the last couple of years has Mount Vernon on Halloween even started talking about some of their haunted history or spooky stories. I do not expect the Mount Vernon Blaze Association any day now to, like the White House, to be allowing a paranormal investigation, and I don't think one should be done there. I think that is a very sacred place in American history. The accounts are just what people going there as tourists have experienced, or people who have worked there as guides have experienced.
And have there been other homes in the United States owned by presidents or those that are very famous in history that have homes that are now haunted?
Most of them, actually.
Most of them.
Monticello, people have heard a man humming. And Thomas Jefferson was known to hum as he walked. People have also encountered the spirit of Jefferson's wife, Martha, or at least the memory of her in the oldest section of the house, where she spent a very unhappy winter at. So they felt Martha Jefferson's spirit there. People have heard humming. Let's see. There's supposed to be, it's not connected to the Monroes, but there's supposed to be a little girl at James Monroe's plantation called Highland. Most of them have had a story connected to it.
And I have one final question to end today on a high note. I noticed on your social media that you are a big fan of Doctor Who. So
Yes,
what are
I
your
am.
thoughts on David Tennant returning to the show?
I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to see it. I'm a newer Who fan. I came on during the Capaldi era, so I'm really excited to see what the show can do under Russell T Davies. The last couple of eras has not personally been a favorite of mine. I also adore the classic era, so I'm really happy. I'm really excited that what's going to happen for the 60th anniversary next year.
Oh my gosh, when I came across the news, I was internally screaming because David Tennant is the Doctor Who of the new era.
Oh yeah.
So when and his look with the suit and the Converse, I'm like rocking it right there. When I came across that on your social media, I'm like, I have to ask Michelle this question. I have to, because this is exciting news for us Who fans.
It is, yeah.
Michelle, thank you so much for being on Shifting the Paradigm. Where can people find you online?
They can find me on Facebook. I'm Michelle L. Hamilton, author. I am also on Twitter under History Whiz 1. Those are the sites that I update the most. I try to be a good blogger, but it's really difficult when you have a full-time job being a museum manager plus writing. But I am most active on Facebook and on Twitter.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
Oh, thank you.
You're listening to the UNX Network, KUNX-DB, Kansas City, Missouri.
It was such a pleasure to speak with Michelle and to hear about Civil War ghosts. All of her social media links and where to purchase her books are in the description box below. Check out my website at strangeparadigms.com to catch all of these show archives in podcast and video formats, along with guest appearances and all of my social media links, such as Discord, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and more. Follow me on Twitter at eyes_on-the-skies to catch all of my updates and news. I want to wish you all a wonderful week. Please like this video or podcast on your platform of choice and share it with those who have the same interests. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there's a lot more great shows coming to you soon. Be safe, and remember, keep your eyes on the skies.